Paradise was the plan. The kind of paradise people save screenshots of. A private bungalow perched above the sea. White curtains breathing with the ocean wind. Waves folding into the shore like a lullaby written just for two. This was supposed to be the beginning. But by the time resort security forced the door open, the ocean was no longer a lullaby. It was background noise to something far darker. By the time they stepped inside, Jasmine Davis had been stabbed 19 times. By the time the blood-soaked sheets were pulled back, the man she married 3 days earlier was already gone. And in that moment, paradise stopped pretending. Because what lay inside that honeymoon suite wasn't just the aftermath of violence. It was the final page of a story that had been quietly writing itself for years. Moonlight Cliff's emergency line, "What is the nature of the situation?" A pause. Static. A breath caught halfway between panic and disbelief. We haven't heard from the guests in Bungalow 7. There was screaming earlier. We knocked. No response. Another pause. Longer this time. There's blood. Under the door. Outside, the ocean kept moving. Inside, time froze. Security would later say the silence felt wrong. Not peaceful. Not calm. Heavy. Like something was waiting. When the door finally gave way, the first thing they noticed wasn't Jasmine. It was the room. Furniture shifted, as if an argument had been physical long before it became fatal. A shattered wine glass glittering under soft yellow light. A phone face down on the floor, screen cracked, silent. And then they saw her. Jasmine Davis, 26 years old. Newly married. Still wearing the bracelet from the beachfront dinner earlier that night. Defensive wounds on her arms. Blood pooled beneath her like a shadow that refused to move. And Malik Thompson was nowhere in sight. No shoes. No phone. No explanation. Only bare footprints leading away from the bungalow and into the dark. Here's the thing about places like Ocho Rios. They sell you the idea that beauty protects you. That luxury is insulation. That love, when wrapped in sunsets and champagne, becomes untouchable. But violence doesn't need permission. It doesn't care about view ratings or honeymoon packages. And it doesn't begin when the knife is raised. It begins much earlier. Quietly. Because Jasmine didn't wake up that morning thinking she would die. She woke up thinking about her wedding dress still hanging back in Kingston. About how quickly the day had passed. About how Malik had held her hand just a little too tightly during the vows. To anyone watching, they were perfect. Malik Thompson, 29. Calm. Polite. The kind of man parents trusted on instinct. An IT technician recently hired by a Canadian software firm. Stable. Ambitious. Reliable. And Jasmine. Jasmine was light. A teacher. A storyteller. Someone who believed words could soften even the hardest truths. They met 3 years earlier at a teacher training seminar. He was there to set up the audio equipment. She was there to talk about narrative, about how stories shape understanding. It felt poetic. It felt safe. But safety, real safety, doesn't make you whisper doubts into voice notes you never intend anyone else to hear. And just weeks before the wedding, Jasmine did exactly that. The night before they left for the honeymoon, she sent a message to her best friend Chen. Not a text. A voice note. Her voice was low. Controlled. The kind of calm that only exists when someone is trying not to scare themselves. She talked about Malik's temper. About how fast his trust turned into suspicion. About how love sometimes felt like walking on glass and calling it devotion. She ended the message with a laugh that didn't quite land. Maybe the honeymoon will fix things, she said. People say that often. As if geography can repair what honesty could not. At Sangster International Airport, witnesses would later say the couple looked happy. Jasmine smiled for photos. Malik stood close. Very close. But one detail lingered. Someone noticed his expression didn't change when the camera clicked. No smile. No excitement. Just a stare that seemed to look past the moment. and into something unresolved. When they arrived at Moonlight Cliffs, the staff gave them the tour. Private beach access. Outdoor shower. A butler on call. And when the door to Bungalow 7 closed behind them, Malik leaned in and whispered something that would later echo in the minds of investigators. 5 days, he said. Just us. It sounded romantic. Until it didn't. That first night, Jasmine posted a photo. Ocean. Candlelight. A caption about forever. By the third day, the post stopped. Friends noticed. Chen noticed. Resort staff noticed too. A raised voice here. A slammed door there. Nothing dramatic enough to intervene. Nothing loud enough to call the police. Just enough to suggest that whatever followed them to Ocho Rios had already unpacked its bags. And somewhere inside that bungalow, a truth was waiting to be confronted. A truth Malik had already seen. Messages. Names from the past. Words that bruised his pride more deeply than any physical betrayal ever could. And by the time dessert was prepared for their final beachfront dinner, something irreversible was already in motion. What happened next would shock a nation. But the most unsettling part is how quietly it all began, and how easy it was to miss the warning signs. Before Jasmine Davis ever became a headline, before her name was spoken in courtrooms and whispered in news reports, she was simply a girl growing up in Kingston, in a house that always smelled faintly of old books and morning tea. Her childhood bedroom was small, but alive. Posters taped slightly crooked to the wall. A narrow desk pressed against the window, where sunlight spilled in just enough to make her squint while she wrote. Not homework. Stories. Jasmine wrote constantly. She filled notebooks with half-finished poems, imagined conversations, and long journal entries addressed to no one in particular. Writing was how she made sense of the world. When things felt heavy, she didn't argue. She didn't shout. She wrote. Teachers noticed it early. Friends leaned on it often. If someone needed words for a card, a speech, an apology, Jasmine was the one they called. And maybe that was the first clue. Because Jasmine didn't just know how to express emotions. She knew how to soften them. How to reshape sharp truths into something easier for others to swallow. She became a teacher for that very reason. Not because it was easy, but because she believed understanding could change people. Her students described her as patient, gentle, the kind of teacher who listened longer than she spoke. And in her personal life, she carried those same traits, sometimes to her own detriment. Jasmine avoided conflict the way some people avoid storms. If tension entered a room, she instinctively looked for a way to calm it, to explain it, to apologize for it, even when it wasn't hers to fix. Friends noticed a pattern long before Jasmine did. She said sorry when someone else raised their voice. She rewrote her own feelings so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. She believed love meant compromise, even when compromise began to look like self-erasure. So when Malik Thompson entered her life, he didn't arrive as a threat. He arrived as reassurance. He was composed, soft-spoken, protective. At first it felt like balance. They met during that teacher training seminar, 3 years before the wedding. Malik had been tasked with setting up the audio-visual equipment. Jasmine had been scheduled to lead a workshop on storytelling as a teaching tool. They spoke during a break. He listened closely as she talked about narrative, about how stories shape identity. He nodded, asked thoughtful questions, remembered small details. To Jasmine, it felt like being seen. And Malik made her feel chosen. But choice can slowly turn into ownership if no one notices the shift. Early on, it was small things. Questions that sounded like curiosity. Who's that guy you mentioned from work? Do you always stay late with your colleagues? Jasmine answered openly. She had nothing to hide. At first. Then the questions changed. Why did she need to stay late? Why didn't she mention she'd be working with male colleagues? Why did she smile when she talked about them? Malik framed it carefully. Not as accusation. As concern. I just worry about you. You know how people are. I trust you. I just don't trust them. To Jasmine, it sounded like protection. To her friends, it sounded like the beginning of something else. Slowly, Malik began inserting himself into her social world. He wanted to know who she was with, who she spoke to, who she confided in. When Jasmine went out with friends, Malik checked in often. Not angrily. Lovingly. Too lovingly. If a male colleague's name came up, Malik's tone shifted. Subtle. Barely noticeable. But Jasmine felt it. She adjusted her stories accordingly. Edited details. Chose peace over honesty. And when friends gently pointed it out, Jasmine brushed it off. He just cares. He's been hurt before. I can handle it. That sentence, I can handle it, would follow her for years. As their relationship deepened, the isolation did too. Not through ultimatums. Through influence. Malik didn't tell her not to see her friends. He just made it inconvenient. He didn't forbid her independence. He questioned it until she questioned herself. If she chose him over plans, he praised her devotion. If she chose herself, he withdrew. And Jasmine, always seeking harmony, adjusted. She smoothed things over. She explained away discomfort. She apologized for reactions that were entirely reasonable. Friends noticed she spoke less about herself and more about Malik's feelings. She checked her phone more often. She asked permission without realizing she was asking. Still, no one saw danger. Not yet. Because Malik never raised a hand. He never shouted in public. He never left visible marks. And in relationships like that, the damage doesn't announce itself. It accumulates. Quietly. By the time Malik proposed, Jasmine hesitated. Not long enough to stop it. Just long enough to feel uneasy. She told herself marriage would stabilize things. That commitment would bring security. That love, officially named, would stop feeling so fragile. But beneath the engagement photos and smiling announcements, something else was growing. A tension that didn't need shouting. A jealousy that didn't need proof. A control that didn't yet look like violence. And as Jasmine packed her bags for the honeymoon, she carried more than dresses and sandals. She carried unspoken doubts, unanswered questions, and a quiet hope that paradise would finally make everything right. She had no way of knowing that the same patterns she had spent years smoothing over were about to resurface in the most unforgiving way imaginable, and that the man she trusted to protect her was already unraveling, long before they ever set foot in Ocho Rios. To the outside world, Malik Thompson was the kind of man people trusted without asking why. He spoke softly, held doors open, looked elders in the eye when he greeted them. When Jasmine introduced him to her parents, they were relieved. He was respectful, attentive, present, the kind of man mothers describe as well brought up. He dressed neatly, never raised his voice, listened more than he spoke. And in a culture where first impressions often decide everything, Malik passed every test. But character is not revealed in public. It is revealed in private, when there is no audience to perform for. Behind closed doors, Malik's calm was not peace. It was control under pressure. Malik believed deeply in order, in structure, in roles. He believed a man who provided was owed loyalty, not shared loyalty, exclusive loyalty. And when he finally landed a job with a Canadian software company, that belief intensified. The job wasn't just employment. It was identity. Success, to Malik, was proof of worth. Failure was humiliation. He spoke often about moving abroad, about building a life that looked impressive from the outside, about being the man who made it. But that pressure came with a cost. Any perceived threat to his image, to his authority, to his emotional investment, felt personal. And Malik did not process insecurity well. He internalized it, then projected it. Before Jasmine, there had been someone else. A woman Malik rarely spoke about. Friends remembered her vaguely. A relationship that ended suddenly. No dramatic fallout. No public arguments. Just an absence. When asked what happened, Malik would shrug. She couldn't handle commitment, he'd say. Some people don't understand loyalty. But those close enough to notice patterns remembered something else. He had checked her phone too, asked the same questions, framed the same concerns as care. And when she began pushing back, when she asked for space, she left. No closure. No explanation. Just gone. To Malik, that disappearance was not a lesson. It was a wound. And wounds like that don't heal on their own. They harden. By the time he met Jasmine, Malik was already convinced of something dangerous. That love, if not tightly held, would be taken away. So he held tightly. He remembered details others forgot. Tracked routines. Noted tone changes. And when something felt off, he didn't ask. He assumed. Jealousy, in Malik's mind, wasn't mistrust. It was vigilance. He told himself he was protecting what was his. And because he never shouted, never struck, never openly threatened, it was easy for everyone, including Jasmine, to miss the warning signs. Malik's care came with conditions. He wanted to know where Jasmine was, who she spoke to, what she thought. Not because he feared losing her, but because he feared not controlling the narrative. He didn't just want love. He wanted certainty. The Canadian job added fuel to that fire. Late nights. Time zone differences. Messages unanswered for hours. Every silence felt louder. Every delay felt intentional. When Jasmine didn't reply immediately, Malik imagined reasons. When she laughed at a message, he wondered who sent it. And instead of voicing fear, he voiced suspicion. Why didn't you tell me you'd be busy? Who were you with? You know how things look. To him, those questions were reasonable. To Jasmine, they were exhausting. But she still tried. She reassured him. Explained herself. Smoothed the edges. Because Malik had learned something early in life. If you speak calmly enough, your control doesn't look like control. It looks like concern. And that's what made him dangerous. Not rage. Not violence. But the belief that someone else's emotional world belonged to him. That their thoughts, their connections, their pasts, were subject to his approval. To Malik, love was not a shared space. It was territory. And territory, once threatened, had to be defended. By the time Jasmine and Malik boarded that plane to Jamaica's north coast, Malik was already carrying something heavier than luggage. He was carrying suspicion, unresolved wounds, and a growing conviction that something about Jasmine didn't fully belong to him anymore. He didn't yet know what it was, but he was determined to find out. And once he did, nothing would stop him from confronting it, even if that confrontation destroyed everything in its path. Some secrets don't explode. They seep. They linger quietly beneath the surface, convincing everyone they've disappeared, until the wrong person starts digging. Andre Blake was not a stranger from the shadows. He wasn't a mystery man or a sudden temptation. He was history. Andre and Jasmine had known each other long before Malik entered the picture. They worked in the same educational circles, same conferences, same professional frustrations, same love for literature and language. Their connection had never been dramatic. It was familiar, comforting. And when their romantic relationship ended years earlier, it didn't end in bitterness. It ended in understanding. Or so Jasmine believed. They drifted apart the way many people do. Careers moved forward. Life intervened. Silence grew naturally. Until it didn't. Months before Jasmine's wedding, Andre reached out. Not with flirtation. Not with desire. With memory. A message about an old workshop. A joke about a former colleague. A line from a book they both loved. To anyone else, it would have meant nothing. To Jasmine, It felt like stepping into a room she hadn't realized she missed. At first, the messages were harmless. Professional. Nostalgic. But nostalgia has weight. It pulls at unfinished emotions. It reopens doors you thought were sealed. Jasmine never crossed a physical line. Never planned to. Never wanted to. But emotionally, she wavered. She confided in Andre about stress. About doubt. About feeling misunderstood. About the pressure of being everything to everyone. Andre listened. And that was enough to confuse her. There were no explicit messages. No photos. No plans to meet. Just vulnerability. And vulnerability, to the wrong person, can feel like betrayal. Jasmine knew it too. That's what tore at her. She felt guilty even as she typed. She deleted messages, not because they were wrong, but because she didn't want to explain them. She told herself she was seeking closure. That unresolved emotions needed acknowledgement to be released. But closure is rarely clean. And guilt has a way of sharpening fear. Malik didn't know any of this at first. Not consciously. But something had shifted. Jasmine guarded her phone more closely. Paused before answering questions. Smiled less when Malik entered the room. And Malik noticed everything. The discovery didn't happen in one dramatic moment. There was no explosive confrontation. It happened gradually. A notification that disappeared too quickly. A name Malik didn't recognize. A phone tilted just slightly away from his view. At some point, Malik began watching. Not openly. Quietly. He memorized Jasmine's habits. Noted when she used her phone. Tracked when she didn't. And one night, when Jasmine left the room to shower, Malik did something he had justified 1,000 times in his head. He picked up her phone. What he found wasn't what he expected. No explicit betrayal. No evidence of an affair. Instead, he found something worse in his mind. Words. Emotion. Connection. Messages that spoke of confusion. Of shared history. Of feelings not fully buried. And some messages were missing. Deleted. That detail consumed him. Because to Malik, deletion meant intention. He didn't just read what was there. He studied what wasn't. He scrolled back obsessively. Checked timestamps. Noted gaps in conversation. Minutes mattered. Hours mattered. Why did this message come at 11:42 p.m.? Why did she reply at 11:46? Why was there silence after that? Malik didn't see context. He saw patterns. And once Malik believed something was being hidden from him, he stopped seeing Jasmine as a partner. He saw her as a suspect. From that moment on, surveillance became routine. He checked her phone whenever he could. Monitored her reactions. Tested her with questions designed to catch inconsistencies. Who did you talk to today? Why did you seem distracted earlier? You've been different lately. Jasmine felt it immediately. The tension. The weight of being observed. She denied physical infidelity. And she was telling the truth. But Malik wasn't looking for truth. He was looking for validation of his fear. To him, emotional connection was not less a betrayal. It was deeper. More dangerous. Because bodies could be forgiven. But hearts were ownership. And Malik believed Jasmine's heart was slipping away. Every deleted message became proof. Every pause became suspicion. Every reassurance sounded rehearsed. He didn't confront her directly at first. He waited. Watched. Collected what he believed were pieces of a puzzle only he could see. And Jasmine, sensing the shift, began to feel trapped between two truths. The guilt of emotional vulnerability. And the fear of Malik's growing intensity. She stopped responding to Andre. Cut off the conversation abruptly. But by then, it was too late. Because the damage had already been done. Not between Jasmine and Andre, but inside Malik. A seed had been planted. And in the days leading up to the honeymoon, that seed was growing fast. rooted in jealousy, watered by obsession, and fed by a belief that love, once threatened, must be reclaimed at any cost. By the time the plane lifted off toward Ocho Rios, Malik no longer wondered if something had happened. He was convinced of something far more dangerous, that something had been taken from him, and that the truth, whatever it was, would be forced into the open. Soon. The wedding day arrived wrapped in light. Music spilled into the street. Laughter echoed off painted walls. Fabric shimmered. Cameras flashed. To anyone watching, it was perfect. Jasmine Davis stood at the center of it all, dressed in white, smiling the kind of smile that convinces people everything is exactly as it should be. Her hands trembled only slightly as she greeted relatives, accepted hugs, posed for photographs that would later feel unbearable to look at. The ceremony moved smoothly. The vows were spoken clearly. Applause followed on cue, and Malik Thompson stood beside her, composed and steady. He didn't fidget, didn't rush, didn't show nerves. If anything, he seemed distant. Not unhappy, just elsewhere. Guests noticed it, but no one questioned it. Weddings are overwhelming. People process them differently. Malik's calm was interpreted as maturity, strength, poise. Jasmine's parents were proud. They looked at Malik and saw stability. A man who would take care of their daughter. A man who didn't drink too much, didn't joke too loudly, didn't embarrass himself. A safe man. The dance floor filled quickly. Music pulsed. Jasmine laughed as her friends pulled her into the crowd. For brief moments, she looked lighter, freer, almost like herself again. But every so often, her eyes drifted across the room, toward Malik. He watched her closely, not smiling, not frowning, just watching, as if committing the moment to memory, as if measuring something invisible. Later that night, when the noise softened and the guests began to thin, Jasmine stepped away from the celebration and found a quiet corner. That's when she sent the voice note. Her best friend Chen would listen to it days later, replaying it again and again, trying to hear what she had missed the first time. Jasmine's voice was low, controlled, careful. She talked about feeling overwhelmed, about how beautiful everything looked on the outside, about how she wished she felt the same way on the inside. She admitted she was afraid to bring up anything difficult, afraid of starting an argument so close to the wedding, afraid of ruining the moment everyone else seemed to be enjoying. She paused for a long time before finishing. Then she said something that would later feel unbearable. Maybe the honeymoon will reset everything. A reset. As if tension could be erased by distance. As if silence could be healed by scenery. What Jasmine didn't say in that voice note was just as important. She didn't say that earlier that day, she had considered postponing the honeymoon. Just for a little while. She had woken up with a tightness in her chest she couldn't explain. A quiet resistance. The kind that doesn't scream danger but whispers discomfort. She mentioned it briefly to a relative. Then to a friend. The response was immediate. You're just nervous. That's normal. You need time alone together. Marriage is about fresh starts. Even her parents echoed it. They had invested emotionally in this union. They wanted to see it succeed. And Malik said very little. He listened, nodded, assured her everything would be fine. His calmness became its own argument. How could she justify delaying a honeymoon when nothing was visibly wrong? So Jasmine pushed the feeling down. She smiled. She danced. She boarded the emotional momentum carrying her forward. Malik, meanwhile, remained composed. Guests would later say he barely drank, barely laughed, barely engaged in the chaos around him. He stayed close to Jasmine. Too close. When people congratulated him, he accepted with polite nods. When someone joked about married life, he smiled thinly. And beneath that calm exterior, something else was happening. Malik wasn't celebrating. He was observing. He watched who spoke to Jasmine, who hugged her longer than necessary, Who made her laugh? The wedding didn't reassure him. It intensified everything. Because commitment, to Malik, didn't bring peace. It brought entitlement. That night, after the final song faded and the guests began to leave, Jasmine stood beside her new husband and waved goodbye, unaware that the day she thought marked the beginning of something safe had instead solidified something dangerous. As the celebration ended, the pressure lifted from everyone else. But not from Malik. And not from Jasmine. Because once the illusion faded, once the music stopped, once the witnesses were gone, there would be nothing left to distract them from what had been quietly building all along. And the honeymoon, meant to be a reward, was about to become a reckoning. A place where there would be no friends to intervene, no family to reassure, no familiar routines to soften the tension. Just two people. And everything they had avoided saying. Alone. The plane touched down just after midday. Sunlight spilled across the runway at Sangster International Airport, bright and unapologetic, the kind of light that makes everything feel possible. The cabin filled with movement. Seatbelts clicked open. Laughter floated through the aisle as passengers reached for bags and phones, eager to document arrival. Jasmine stood slowly, adjusting her dress, taking a deep breath as if she were stepping into something new. Malik stood beside her, silent. At the gate, they looked like any other newlyweds. Close. Coordinated. Polite smiles exchanged with airport staff. A brief kiss on the cheek for a passing camera. But witnesses would later recall Malik's eyes. Unblinking. Fixed. Somewhere far beyond the moment. While Jasmine paused to admire the warm air, the palm-lined walkways, the feeling of being somewhere untouched by routine, Malik scanned the space around them. People. Exits. Distances. It didn't look like excitement. It looked like assessment. The drive to Ocho Rios was long enough for the city to fade and the landscape to soften. Hills rolled past the windows. The ocean appeared, disappeared, then returned again, wider each time. Jasmine pressed her forehead lightly to the glass, smiling. Malik watched her reflection instead. Moonlight cliffs sat high above the shoreline, hidden from the main road by dense greenery and a discreet entrance gate. It was designed for privacy, for escape, for the illusion that the outside world could not follow you inside. A security guard waved them through after checking their names. No metal detectors. No bag searches. No cameras visible at the entrance. Just trust. The resort manager greeted them personally. Warm tone. Congratulatory handshake. A rehearsed speech about tranquility and exclusivity. They were led down a winding path lit by low lanterns, the sound of waves growing louder with each step. Other bungalows were spaced far apart, deliberately out of view, separated by foliage and shadows. Privacy wasn't a feature. It was the selling point. Bungalow 7 sat near the edge of the property, where the cliff dropped steeply toward the sea. From the outside, it looked untouched. Almost unreal. Inside, everything gleamed. Glass doors opening to the ocean. White linens folded precisely. Candles placed but unlit. The kind of room designed to erase tension. The kind of room where voices don't travel far. As the staff explained amenities, Jasmine nodded politely, barely listening, overwhelmed by the beauty of it all. Malik listened closely. Emergency exits. Service paths. Night security patrol times. It was mentioned casually. Almost proudly. Security made rounds every few hours. Cameras covered main walkways. Guests were encouraged to enjoy uninterrupted privacy. No one mentioned the blind spots. No one mentioned how easy it was to move between bungalows after dark without being seen. How the sound of waves swallowed footsteps. How the paths curved just enough to disappear into shadow. When the staff finally left, the door closed softly behind them. Silence. Jasmine laughed. Breathless. She spun once, arms out, as if to test whether the room was real. Malik didn't move. He crossed the room slowly, sliding the door shut, then locking it. The sound was subtle. Final. As Jasmine walked toward the balcony, Malik stepped close behind her and leaned in, his voice low enough that it barely disturbed the air. 5 days, he said. Just us. It should have sounded romantic. But something in his tone made Jasmine stiffen. Not enough to turn around. Not enough to respond. She smiled instead. Outside, the ocean surged below them, endless and indifferent. And in that moment, standing in a place designed to disappear from the world, Jasmine had no way of knowing just how completely unseen she was about to become. Because paradise, when stripped of witnesses, offers no protection at all. And once the sun set over moonlight cliffs, the shadows would belong to anyone bold enough to move through them. Quietly. The first cracks didn't arrive loudly. They slipped in quietly, disguised as small moments no one thought to question. The morning sun rose gently over moonlight cliffs, spilling gold across the water, turning the ocean into glass. Jasmine woke early that first full day, wrapped in white sheets, listening to the waves below. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to believe this place might do what she hoped it would. Reset everything. At breakfast, she smiled. At the staff, she laughed. At Malik, she tried. But something had shifted. Malik watched her more than he spoke. When Jasmine reached for her phone to take a photo of the view, his eyes followed the movement. When a message notification appeared on her screen, his jaw tightened, just slightly. Not enough to confront. Enough to notice. By midday, Jasmine went to the pool alone. The infinity pool sat at the edge of the cliff, blending seamlessly with the ocean beyond. A handful of guests lounged quietly, soaking in the calm. Among them was a British tourist, Helen Mott, who would later become one of the most important witnesses in this case. Helen noticed Jasmine immediately. Not because she was loud. Not because she was disruptive. Because she looked unsettled. Jasmine sat at the edge of the pool, feet dangling in the water, staring ahead as if trying to steady her thoughts. She kept checking her phone, then setting it down, then picking it back up again. When Malik appeared, Jasmine's shoulders tensed. Helen would later say it was subtle, but unmistakable. Jasmine flinched. Not dramatically. Not obviously. Just enough to suggest fear had already entered the room. Malik greeted her calmly. Sat beside her. Asked what she was doing. Jasmine answered softly. They spoke in low voices, but the tension between them was visible. Malik leaned in too close. His tone sharpened. Jasmine nodded quickly, as if agreeing to end something before it began. When Malik walked away to get a drink, Jasmine exhaled deeply, her hands shaking as she clasped them together. Helen watched all of it. So did the staff. Over the next 2 days, patterns emerged. Jasmine stopped carrying her phone freely. She kept it face down. Muted. When Malik reached for it, she stiffened. And Malik noticed. He began monitoring her movements more closely. Asking where she was going. Who she had spoken to. Why she hadn't replied immediately when he messaged her from across the resort. At dinner, he watched her screen light up instead of her face. If a message arrived, his eyes flicked toward it instinctively. The romance faded quickly. Staff members overheard arguments late at night. Not screaming. Not violent. Controlled. Sharp. Pressurized. Whispers that cut deeper than shouting. Jasmine's voice occasionally cracked. Malik's remained steady. Calm. Almost rehearsed. And in arguments like that, calm is not peace. It is dominance. On the third morning, Jasmine approached the front desk alone. Her hands trembled as she asked a simple question. Was early checkout possible? The receptionist paused. Explained the policy. Offered to check availability. Jasmine nodded quickly, relief flickering across her face. But when Malik found out, the relief vanished. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He simply refused. He reminded her how expensive the trip had been. How people would talk if they left early. How running away wouldn't solve anything. He framed it as reason. As responsibility. As commitment. And Jasmine, exhausted, said nothing. That night, staff again overheard raised voices from Bungalow 7. Something about trust. Something about honesty. Something about before the wedding. When the argument ended, the silence that followed felt heavier than the noise that came before it. Jasmine stopped posting on social media entirely. Friends noticed. Chen noticed. Messages went unanswered. And as the days passed, the ocean continued to roar beneath the cliffs, indifferent to what was unfolding above it. Paradise remained beautiful. But inside Bungalow 7, the walls were closing in. And whatever Malik believed he was uncovering, whatever truth he thought he was entitled to, he was no longer waiting patiently for it to reveal itself. He was pushing. And Jasmine was running out of places to hide. Because the honeymoon wasn't fixing anything. It was accelerating everything. And the moment of reckoning was drawing closer, whether either of them was ready for it or not. By the fourth night, the resort prepared something special. A private beachfront dinner. Candles pressed into the sand. A linen tablecloth fluttering gently in the ocean breeze. Soft lantern light swaying like fireflies caught in glass. From the outside, it looked like romance had returned. A final reset. The kind of moment people imagine when they think of honeymoons. The kind of scene strangers would photograph from a distance and quietly envy. Jasmine arrived first. She wore a light dress, pale against her skin, her hair pulled back neatly. She looked composed, almost serene. But beneath the calm surface, her chest felt tight, her thoughts racing ahead of the moment she was standing in. This dinner wasn't about celebration. It was about survival. When Malik sat down across from her, he smiled. Polite. Controlled. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes weren't. They drifted frequently toward the nearby bar, toward the resort walkway, toward the phone resting beside Jasmine's plate. The server poured wine. Asked how their evening was. Perfect, Malik said. Jasmine nodded. As the waves rolled in and out, Jasmine leaned forward slightly, her voice low, careful, as if choosing the wrong word could tip everything over. She pleaded. Not dramatically. Not tearfully. Quietly. She spoke about starting fresh. About not letting misunderstandings poison their future. About how much pressure she felt, how overwhelmed she had been before the wedding. She told him she loved him. She told him she wanted peace. Malik listened, but not fully. His attention drifted. His fingers tapped against the table. His gaze flicked repeatedly toward the phones. Eventually, he reached out. He slid both devices closer to himself. Let's just focus on us tonight, he said evenly. Jasmine hesitated. Just a beat. Then she nodded and let go. What Malik didn't notice was the brief moment before that. The moment Jasmine's thumb hovered over her screen. Earlier that evening, before the dinner, she had opened a message thread. One she hadn't used since before the wedding. A name she hadn't spoken aloud in days. Her hands shook as she typed. Just a few words. Not an accusation. Not a confession. A lifeline. Something along the lines of, I'm scared, and, I don't know what to do. She stared at it for a long time. Then she deleted it. Or so she thought. The message was never sent. But it wasn't fully erased either. It remained buried in the phone's draft cache. Invisible. Forgotten. Waiting. At dinner, the candles burned low as the courses came and went. Jasmine's appetite disappeared. Malik barely touched his food. When the server returned to ask about dessert, Malik declined. Just bring the check, he said. Jasmine looked out toward the dark water, the waves swallowing the light as they rolled in. For a moment, she considered asking the server for help. For anything. But she didn't. Because fear doesn't always scream. Sometimes it convinces you to stay quiet. They walked back along the beach in silence. Sand clung to Jasmine's feet. Malik walked slightly ahead of her, his shoulders squared, his pace deliberate. Back at the bungalow, the door closed behind them. No witnesses. No staff. No cameras inside. Just two people. And everything they hadn't said. Later, Investigators would describe this dinner as the emotional peak of the honeymoon. The moment when Jasmine tried one last time to steer things back toward safety. And Malik? He wasn't listening anymore. He was distracted. By thoughts he couldn't quiet. By timelines he couldn't reconcile. By a version of betrayal that lived entirely in his head. And somewhere, deep inside Jasmine's phone, sat a message she never got to send. A message that would later speak for her. When she no longer could. Because after that dinner, the story stops being about tension. And starts becoming about what happens when control finally snaps. The bungalow was quiet when they stepped inside. Too quiet. The door clicked shut behind them with a sound that felt final, like punctuation at the end of a sentence no one wanted to finish. Outside, the ocean kept moving, indifferent. Inside, the air felt heavier, thicker, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Jasmine placed her sandals by the door. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She had learned, instinctively now, that sudden gestures could change the temperature of a room. Malik didn't sit. He stood near the foot of the bed, his back straight, his jaw set. He loosened his tie carefully, folding it once, then again, laying it on the dresser with precision. That was the first sign. Because this conversation had already happened. Not out loud. Not yet. It had played through Malik's mind earlier that day. On the balcony. In the shower. On the walk back from dinner. He had rehearsed her responses. Her denials. Her tears. He had already decided which ones were lies. Now he was just following the script. He turned to her. Who is he? The question landed softly. Come. Almost gentle. Jasmine froze. She knew this tone. It wasn't curiosity. It was confirmation. She asked who he meant, even though she already knew. Her voice trembled, betraying her before her words could protect her. Malik smiled faintly. The one you didn't think I'd notice, he said. The one you keep pretending doesn't matter. He stepped closer. Not aggressively. Measured. Jasmine backed toward the edge of the bed, her heart hammering. She tried to explain. To frame it the way she always had. Old history. Emotional support. Nothing physical. Nothing hidden. But Malik wasn't listening. He began listing things. Dates. Times. Durations. How long her phone screen lit up. How quickly it went dark when he entered a room. How her breathing changed when messages came through. He spoke like a man presenting evidence, not a husband seeking truth. In his mind, this wasn't a conversation. It was a trial. And he was both judge and jury. Jasmine shook her head, tears pooling now. She told him she was scared. That she felt trapped. That she hadn't known how to say goodbye to parts of her past without causing chaos. Her fear spilled out in fragments. Malik heard something else entirely. Disrespect. Humiliation. A threat to the image he had built of himself. Later, during questioning, Malik would describe this moment differently. He would say something clicked. That everything suddenly made sense. That he realized she had been planning to leave him all along. That the messages weren't innocent, they were rehearsals for abandonment. In his internal monologue, the one he would eventually confess to, he wasn't losing control. He was regaining it. He told himself he was being calm. That he was finally standing up for himself. That this confrontation was necessary, inevitable. In his mind, Jasmine wasn't afraid. She was guilty. Jasmine, meanwhile, could feel the room closing in. She scanned for exits, for space, for anything solid to anchor herself to. She tried to de-escalate. Lowered her voice. Apologized again, even now, even here. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. That sentence sealed it. Because to Malik, hurt meant intention. And intention meant punishment. The argument stretched on, looping in circles, each word tightening the knot. Accusations layered on top of imagined betrayals. Logic bent and twisted until nothing resembled reality anymore. Outside, guests laughed somewhere down the beach. Inside, Jasmine's fear turned physical. Her hands shook. Her breathing grew shallow. She realized, with sudden clarity, that this was no longer about messages. It was about ownership. About control slipping away. About a man who had already decided how this night would end. And in that bungalow, with the door closed and the ocean still humming outside, the story crossed a line. One that could not be uncrossed. But what happened next? What finally broke the silence of that room? That would only come to light later. Piece by piece. After it was already too late. What happened next was not sudden. That matters. Because violence, in this case, did not explode. It unfolded. Later, when investigators pieced together the timeline, one detail stood out above all others. There was a pause. After the confrontation in the bungalow, Malik left the room. Not in a rush. Not in a frenzy. He walked. Down the softly lit pathway. Past sleeping villas. Toward the resort's service kitchen. CCTV cameras caught him there. The footage would be played again and again in court. Grainy. Silent. Almost mundane. Malik enters the frame wearing casual clothes, shoulders relaxed. He scans the counters. Opens a drawer. Closes it. Opens another. He selects a knife. Not the first one his hand touches. Not the largest. A mid-sized blade. Balanced. Practical. He stands there for several seconds, motionless, as if weighing something only he could see. Then he turns and walks out of frame. That gap matters too. Because between the argument and the violence, there was time. Time to cool off. Time to reconsider. Time to walk away. Instead, Malik walked back. Back to the bungalow. Inside, Jasmine was still alive. What followed was reconstructed through evidence, not witnesses. The screams came first. Short. Sharp. Panicked. A nearby guest later told police she heard what sounded like a woman shouting, "Stop," over and over, before the noise was swallowed by the ocean and the thick walls of the resort. Then, silence. Not immediate, but eventual. When security would later enter the bungalow, the room told its own story. Furniture shifted. A lamp knocked over. The bed sheets stained dark. The autopsy report would fill in what the room could not say out loud. Jasmine had been stabbed 19 times. The medical examiner was careful with their language. Precise. Clinical. Because this wasn't about shock. It was about truth. Several wounds were defensive. Cuts to her hands. Injuries to her forearms. Signs that she fought back. That she raised her arms instinctively. That she tried to protect her face. That she was conscious during the attack. Other wounds were clustered, indicating repeated strikes to the same areas. Not wild. Not random. This was not a single moment of rage. It was sustained, deliberate. And somewhere in that sequence, Jasmine collapsed. The examiner would later note that some wounds were inflicted after she was already down. Already weakened. Possibly already losing consciousness. What's haunting is what didn't appear in the report. No defensive injuries on Malik. No signs of a struggle on his body. Because power, once established, rarely needs force for long. The final moments inside that bungalow remained silent. No camera. No recording. Just the aftermath. By the time Malik left the room, Jasmine was no longer moving. And yet, the story still wasn't over. Because what Malik did next would raise even more questions. About intent. About awareness. About whether, at any point, he understood what he had done. Or whether, even then, he believed he was still in control. That part of the story begins after the knife was set down. After the door opened again. After Paradise finally revealed what it had been hiding all along. When the resort staff arrived for the nightly check, they expected the usual quiet. The soft hum of air conditioning. The faint clink of glasses from other villas. The predictable rustle of the ocean against the cliffs. Instead, they found something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The door to Bungalow 7 was ajar. At first, a thought of forgetfulness crossed their minds. Maybe a guest had left in a hurry. But the moment the security guard stepped closer, the subtle metallic scent hit him. Blood. Deep. Dark. Staining the threshold. They hesitated. Called the front desk. Checked the cameras. No one entering or leaving. The air seemed to thicken around them. Then, finally, the decision was made. The door had to be forced open. When it yielded with a sharp crack, the scene inside froze them in place. White sheets, once pristine, were soaked red. Furniture disarrayed as though a struggle had taken place. A knife resting on the floor, still heavy with what it had wrought. And on the bed, Jasmine Davis. Motionless. 19 stab wounds marking a life cut brutally short. Defensive injuries on her arms spoke of her fight, of her final attempts to survive, to resist. There was no time for grief. Not yet. Malik Thompson was gone. Footprints, bare and bloody, led from the bungalow down the jagged path toward the lower gardens and disappeared into the night. The staff called local authorities immediately. Sirens arrived minutes later, but by then, Malik had vanished into darkness. National alerts were issued. Police checkpoints set up on every road leading out of Ocho Rios. Airports and bus stations notified. Helicopters scanned the cliffs and hills. But it was as if the earth itself was helping him hide. Meanwhile, the public reaction was immediate and visceral. Messages flooded social media. News channels interrupted regular programming. A honeymoon murder in a paradise resort? The idea alone was almost unbearable. Headlines splashed across screens. Newlywed bride stabbed at luxury Jamaican resort. Honeymoon ends in horror. Killer still at large. Journalists swarmed. Reporters interviewed trembling staff, frantic guests, and distraught relatives. Every image of Jasmine and Malik before the trip, the smiling wedding photos, the Instagram posts of the couple walking hand in hand on the beach, was replayed endlessly, twisted now by the shadow of tragedy. Comments flooded online. Shock. Disbelief. Anger. People questioned how such violence could happen in a place marketed as safe, romantic, untouchable. The idea of paradise, so meticulously packaged, was now inseparable from horror. News crews descended on Kingston. Friends of Jasmine held impromptu vigils. Candlelight flickered on street corners as the nation struggled to process what had happened. And all the while, Malik Thompson moved. Silent. Calculating. Always a few steps ahead of the search. The honeymoon, meant to be a private retreat, had transformed into a crime scene that gripped an entire country. The manhunt had begun. And the question that would haunt everyone, police, staff, and public alike, was simple but terrifying. Where could someone go when paradise itself had already witnessed the crime? 36 hours passed like a slow-moving storm. The manhunt stretched across Ocho Rios, across rural roads and hidden trails, through dense forests and crumbling fishing villages. Police combed every path, every outbuilding. The nation followed each update with bated breath, glued to television screens and social media feeds. Then, finally, Malik Thompson was found. A dilapidated fishing hut, perched on the edge of a quiet inlet, hidden by overgrown shrubs and the shadows of early morning. He was alone, barefoot, exhausted, bloodied shoes left behind at the resort still tracing the path he had taken. He surrendered without resistance. No struggle. No dramatic chase. Just a man, quietly cornered by the weight of his own actions. Taken into custody, Malik's demeanor was chilling in its calmness. The press observed, cameras rolling, but he offered no apology, no visible emotion, nothing that suggested remorse. Investigators would later note his composure, the way he recounted his version of events with meticulous, almost rehearsed clarity, yet never once acknowledging the full gravity of the life he had ended. The trial that followed 6 months later became a spectacle, a national event, and a painful reckoning for Jasmine's family and the public who had followed every moment. Inside the courtroom, tension hung like a heavy curtain. Reporters, families, and citizens alike watched as the prosecution laid out the evidence. The CCTV footage of the kitchen, the recovered deleted drafts on Jasmine's phone, the forensic analysis of defensive wounds, and the timeline of the premeditated attack. Every detail painted a portrait of calculated rage. The defense argued, as they often do in crimes of passion, that Malik had been overwhelmed, that his emotions had overcome him in a single, tragic moment. But the jury saw the evidence differently. The pauses, the rehearsed steps, the retrieval of the knife, the careful monitoring of Jasmine's movements. And then came Malik's final statement, delivered with measured calm, almost a whisper that carried through the hushed courtroom. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I only wanted to protect what was mine. I lost control, and I regret nothing that could bring her back." The words echoed, chilling, unapologetic, detached. A silence fell over the courtroom, broken only by the faint sound of papers shuffling. The judge, stern and precise, addressed the court before sentencing. "Let this case serve as a reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked jealousy and violence. The life taken here was precious and irreplaceable. The law is clear. Justice must be served." Within 3 hours, the jury returned. Guilty. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. No celebration. No relief. Only the stark recognition that one life had been destroyed and another had been irreversibly condemned. For Jasmine's family, the verdict provided some closure, but closure is not relief. Not when the memory of her final moments lingers so heavily. Outside the courthouse, the world watched. The media captured the finality in faces etched with grief, the quiet resignation of the legal system, the public's collective shudder at the horror that had unfolded on what was meant to be paradise. And though Malik would spend his life behind bars, the echoes of his actions would remain, woven into the story of Jasmine Davis, a young bride whose hope for love and peace was extinguished in a place that promised everything and delivered the unthinkable. The courtroom emptied, but the echoes of that case lingered far beyond its walls. In Kingston, Jasmine's school established a memorial scholarship in her name. A small light for young teachers in training, a way to honor her passion for storytelling and her dedication to her students. Friends and colleagues gathered to dedicate the first award. Candles flickered. Tears were shed. Speeches were made. Yet beneath the ceremony lay a quiet, unspoken grief, a reminder that no scholarship could replace her, no ceremony could undo the violence. Moonlight Cliffs implemented immediate reforms. Security patrols were intensified. Cameras were added to previously blind areas. Staff received specialized training in domestic dispute recognition. Guest safety protocols tightened. The resort that had promised sanctuary now carried the weight of tragedy in every hallway, every room, every path where Jasmine had once walked, barefoot on the sand, believing in love. Nationally, the story sparked conversations that had been long overdue. Domestic violence hotlines saw increased calls. Awareness campaigns launched across social media and traditional media alike. People debated jealousy, emotional betrayal, and the warning signs that often go unnoticed until they erupt into horror. Experts explained how patterns of possessiveness, surveillance, and emotional control, behaviors Malik had displayed repeatedly in the past, can escalate without intervention. Jasmine's near-escape moments, her whispered plea for early checkout, the unsent message to Chen, the attempts to reason and de-escalate, were remembered in those discussions as chilling examples of instinctive survival. How close she had come to stepping away from the path that would ultimately claim her life. And yet, the moral of the story was neither simple nor comforting. There were no villains outside the one who acted with deadly intent. There were no heroes who could have prevented it with certainty. There was only awareness, reflection, and the haunting knowledge that paradise, no matter how idyllic, can conceal danger in plain sight. Psychologists dissected Malik's behavior, the rehearsed confrontations, the fixation on timestamps of messages, the obsessive monitoring of Jasmine's movements. A timeline emerged showing gradual escalation, from minor doubts to intense jealousy, leading to fatal action. It was a study in human psychology, a cautionary tale of what obsession and unchecked emotion can produce. For Jasmine's friends and family, for the teachers who remember her smile, for the students who adored her storytelling, and for everyone who followed the story from afar, the tragedy was a reminder that love, no matter how deeply felt, cannot calm a storm built from fear, control, and obsession. Her life, so full of promise and warmth, had ended where paradise should have offered protection. And as the waves continued to crash against the cliffs, indifferent yet eternal, one thought remained with chilling clarity. Jasmine believed love would calm the storm. Instead, it placed her directly in its path.